To get into some feast or famine, talking about NBA contenders or pretenders in a Thanksgiving-themed segment based upon some of the moves that we've seen early on here in this NBA offseason. We'll run through a number of teams, and Mike and I will give you our opinion about whether it's going to be a Thanksgiving feast or not so much for some of these teams after we've seen what moves they have made. Selecting Obi Toppin in the first round, Miles Powell signing as an undrafted free agent, Austin Rivers, Nerlens Noel as some of the signings that they have made as Leon Rose and Worldwide West try to revamp this Knicks organization, making some what I think a lot of people would consider smart moves. Is it going to be feast or famine for the Knicks at MSG this season?
Well, first off, it'll definitely be a famine, but that's not to say I don't like what the Knicks are doing. This is at most they'll compete at the end of the season for that play-in tournament they're going to have now. At most, maybe Thibodeau can get some stuff out of them. This is not going to be a playoff team, but I love what they're doing. Obi Toppin, I love the pick. You're getting a guy that's more developed, more seasoned. He's not like, LaMelo coming like very on the younger side. He's a little more seasoned. He shot 70% from the field. Now I know he's a 4, so he's going to like play closer to the basket. So obviously that percentage can be higher. He shot 40% from 3. Now, obviously this is all in college and it's all in, as we know, the A10, which we know pretty well. But I love Toppin. I love Miles Powell. I'm from New Jersey. Watched a fair number of Seton Hall games. I was shocked that he didn't get drafted, at least second round flyer, just try to take him. I mean, this guy was an All-American. He was the biggest player of the year last year. He won the Jerry West Award for best guard in the college basketball. The fact that the Knicks got him is just great. So definitely famine, but I like what they're doing.
There hasn't been a feast at MSG in a long time. It really hasn't. And look, I'm sorry, but we're going to continue to be hungry because this is famine. And I agree with you. I do like some of the moves that the Knicks have made. Obi Toppin, as you mentioned, is a guy who you feel like is a little more seasoned, and especially when the Knicks have had such issues developing players, maybe take a chance on a guy who's a little bit more developed and hope that what Anthony Grant and Dayton did is going to translate to the NBA, and some of his development has happened already, and he's further along than when the Knicks have to get their hands on him and figure everything out. So you like what you see from Obi Toppin, and Miles Powell is another guy who's a bit of an older guy relative to the young players that are coming into the NBA. Austin Rivers, there's not a ton there for me. I think that he is a quality player in this league. I don't know that there's a ton to necessarily get excited about. He's not a franchise changer by any stretch of the imagination, and is a guy who can, if given the right role, can fill it very well, and did that at times in Houston and with the Clippers. So I like that move. And Nerlens Noel, you're taking a flyer and hoping that he can sort of realize some of that potential. What's that?
That one puzzled me a little bit.
You're hoping that he can realize some of the potential. I think you're really just taking a flyer back when he was a lottery pick all those years ago coming out of college. So I'm interested to see where this team ends up. But at the end of the day, there's excitement there where you feel like the Knicks are finally potentially headed in the right direction, but there's still a lot more building to do. And this is not a team that's going to contend. It's going to be famine for me. On to the Phoenix Suns, who made a pair of moves in this offseason. Chris Paul is the headliner. He is traded over from Oklahoma City to pair in the backcourt with Devin Booker. They also add a wing player in Jay Crowder, who was solid for the Heat in their run to the NBA Finals. For the Suns as potential contenders in the Western Conference, is it feast or famine for them?
Oh, this is a Thanksgiving feast. We got the gravy. We got the stuffing. I love the Suns. This team, I mean, what did they go when they went in the bubble? Like 8-0? Yeah. They went on some crazy run. I mean, look, I love Devin Booker. I mean, this guy, he says that Kobe was an inspiration to him. So he's got that Mamba mentality. Chris Paul, this guy will not go away. He is like LeBron. He's ageless. He was an all-star this year. I mean, the guy's like 35. I mean, I love that pairing. And, Jay Crowder was a big part of that Heat run to the finals this year. Very underrated player. He can guard pretty much any position despite his own, size limitations. He can score a little bit. Are the Suns going to upset the Lakers in the playoffs, or are they going to, take down the Clippers? Probably not. But I like this Suns team. I honestly feel, especially with the Warriors losing Clay this year, I definitely think that this Suns team, they could be a 5 seed. I like this team. They could be a 4. Chris Paul willed the Thunder into the playoffs. Now you add him with Devin Booker. This is a feast for me.
I hate to agree with you, but I'm going to have to agree with you here, and it is a feast. And I want to just touch on Chris Paul because he was so incredible playing in Oklahoma City. When he's out in Houston and the narrative is that he's washed up, he's the one who's holding the Rockets back. And when they make that trade for Russell Westbrook, things are really going to take off for them in Houston. And Chris Paul is going to go live out his days in Oklahoma City or get waived because the Thunder don't think he can really play. They just want the picks. And this guy has just a ridiculous contract, and they're just taking it on to get the draft capital. And that wasn't the case at all. I mean, Chris Paul, for a team that was, I don't know what the over-under was for their win total, but no one expected them to sniff the playoffs. It wasn't even close. And he wills them to being better in the regular season than Houston was. Now, maybe that's an indictment. Some of the other pieces covered with Chris Paul did with that group was just extremely impressive. And I think that he, as somebody who facilitates as well as he does, will be a fit almost anywhere. And I'm excited to see what he does with Devin Booker. Jay Crowder is certainly a viable piece off the bench, or if you have to start him in a pinch at a wing player, and certainly a guy who can defend. So I like what you're getting in Jay Crowder, and certainly Chris Paul is a game changer. And we talked about this on draft night here on this program, and I'm not sure if the Suns are in that tier 1 in the Western Conference. They're not up there with the Lakers right now. They're not there with the Clippers, although they, I know, had an embarrassing, playoff exit. But to me, they're in that tier 2. They're in that same conversation with Denver and with Utah, and potentially, Houston, if they weren't to blow things up at the bottom end of that tier. I think they're on par and even better in sort of that tier 2, and could certainly contend. It's not to say that they're a team that you expect to go and potentially win an NBA championship, but could make some noise in the playoffs, and in catching the wrong team in the right series could knock somebody off, one of the big boys, whether it be the Lakers or the Clippers. So I really like what happened for the Suns this offseason, and am really impressed with what Chris Paul has been able to do the last few years of his career. Move on to the Atlanta Hawks, who signed Rajon Rondo, Danilo Gallinari, Boban Bogdanovic as well is on his way to the Atlanta Hawks. This is an interesting team because I'm not sure what to make of Atlanta with Trae Young there as well. They make a couple of moves. Is Atlanta feast or famine?
I'm going to say feast, but with a caveat. So I think this is a feast in the sense this team will make the playoffs. They're going to have a decent year, but they are not winning a title. Could they win a first round playoff matchup? Probably, but I don't love this team. Look, Rondo, I think, proved that he can still play. He was a pretty pivotal part of that Lakers team this year. I think he proved he can still play. Whether or not he's going to play on the floor at the same time as Trae, or going to back him up off the bench, who knows? Bogdanovic, I like. Now, obviously, he was going to go to Milwaukee, and then there was the whole tampering thing, and that fell apart. So, he ends up in Atlanta. That's interesting. So I like this team. Gallinari, look, Knicks fans know Gallinari pretty well. I think when he's healthy, he's a good player. The problem is that he's never healthy. He's hurt all the time. And to give him like a 3-year deal, now I know in the NBA that is throwing away money all the time, but look, this team, like I said, they're going to make the playoffs. They're going to win some games. They'll be okay. But this is not an NBA championship team. So I'll say feast. But I don't love these moves. I'm not like, oh my God, they got Danilo Gallinari. I like Bogdan. But, what do you think, Nick?
I do like Bogdan, but at the same time, the Hawks are famine. They're not a team that I think will contend, and they're a fringe playoff team. I know the East is weak, and maybe they'll surprise me, but it just seems like they don't necessarily fit together. I think Trae Young is a guy who wants to handle the basketball and have things run through him. And now you add Rondo, who isn't really of service to you unless he is doing that and running things. I think that's kind of an odd mixture to see how things work out. Gallinari, a good wing player. I like the moves. I don't think that they are poor by any stretch, but I don't expect a ton out of the Hawks. I'm going to go Famine there. On to Charlotte. The Hornets made a couple of surprising moves. They draft LaMelo Ball. That certainly wasn't a surprise at the top of the draft, but they signed one of the premier free agents at the beginning of things, and that's Gordon Hayward away from the Boston Celtics. There was talk about whether he would re-sign, potentially find a fit with the New York Knicks, but Hayward settles on the Charlotte Hornets. Feast or famine for the Hornets?
I'm going Famine here, and I really have to question what the Hornets are doing. I mean, you're going to give Gordon Hayward all this money, but you wouldn't re-sign Kemba Walker. I mean, I understand. Look, Kemba made his mind up. I'm sure he got a big deal from them too. But look, I don't know. I don't know what the Hornets are doing. I mean, they've just been stuck in this this days, like this middle of the pack mode for years now. I mean, it's so funny to me for the team that is run by arguably the greatest basketball player of all time, probably the most competitive, to be like this blah team. First of all, with LaMelo, I don't understand. Can someone explain to me why people love the Ball brothers so much? I understand. Look, I understand they can pass very well. They're like good players. There's a lot of potential. Everyone watched Lonzo play, right? I don't think LaMelo. I understand people like LaMelo more than Lonzo, but they're saying like he's a comparable shooter to Lonzo. And like, I'm sorry, you don't draft a guy third overall just because he's going to make some pretty passes. And then Gordon Hayward, I'm sorry, he's not been the same guy since his injury.
Yeah, I was just going to say it looks like there's been some issues here with Charlotte in the way that they have sort of constructed their roster. And I don't love exactly what they're doing. They are so hard to figure out, and you're just trying to get to the bottom of what the moves are. They a team that wants to build through the draft and continue to tack on lottery pick after lottery pick and do it that way, or are you a free agent player and signing Gordon Hayward? And there are concerns about his health and ability to stay healthy, and that's a lot of money for a player. I like the Gordon Hayward signing, but this is not a team that's going to contend. This is famine all the way. There's not enough there. Terry Rozier is there as well. I think the point that you bring up is a valid one. If there was all this money available for you in Charlotte, why not give it to Kemba Walker? I think that there was an offer made, and my guess is that Kemba turned it down. Of course, not being privy to the contract negotiations that were there. I'm sure that Charlotte did everything that they could to keep him, and he decided to go elsewhere. But just sort of a funny thing and funny way that things have worked out for them. I don't expect them to be really contenders. Good for Gordon Hayward to sign that extension or sign that contract instead of going with the extension from Boston. But I don't see a lot happening in Charlotte. To the Pelicans, Brandon Ingram signing the extension. They bring in Steven Adams. They have Zion Williamson and a young core there that is really what the Lakers were before they traded for Anthony Davis. How are we feeling about the Pelicans right now, feast or famine for the Birds?
I would say feast, just because. Well, first of all, I don't think this is unique. I don't think because they brought in Steven Adams that this is suddenly a really good team. But Brandon Ingram is quietly, and a lot of people are paying. I mean, he's in New Orleans, but he's quietly becoming one of the better players in the NBA. I mean, this is a guy. He set career highs last season, averaged 23 points a game, 6 rebounds. He was an All-Star. He won Most Improved Player, and it's all the talk, and it's annoying. I'm sure maybe you feel the same way. It's about Zion, Zion, Zion. I mean, look, he's a good player. I mean, he's hurt all the time. He barely played. He can't shoot anything outside the paint, but that's besides the point. So, but Brandon Ingram is quietly one of the better players in the NBA. I still think Zion's very good. So I think the two of them are a very good combo. I don't know if also we can't forget in the trade, they got rid of Drew Holiday, but they bring in a lot of pieces, including Eric Bledsoe, who I think maybe could work well with them. I like New Orleans. I will put them a tier below, like a Phoenix or Utah, maybe. But I think I'm going to go feast here because I like Brandon Ingram a lot.
I do too. I'm going to go with feast on New Orleans as well because of that young core, and I like what they have and continuing to gel together in New Orleans. And you're hoping that Zion Williamson can take a step in year 2 and continue to improve and get better and hopefully stay healthy. I think that's priority number 1 for him. And Brandon Ingram, as you mentioned, is a guy who has steadily grown and gotten better since getting into the league and quietly become one of the better players in all of the NBA. I mean, Brandon Ingram is no joke. And you bring in Steven Adams in a move that I like, and I think that it gives them a lot of flexibility to run certain things and be more of a physical basketball team with him and Zion. That's an imposing force. So I like what the Pelicans have done. I'm going to go feast there. Let's wrap this thing up quickly. Finally, the Golden State Warriors, feast or famine after an injury to Klay Thompson and adding Kelly Oubre.
I'm going to go famine just because I don't trust Steph and Kelly to win a championship or really make a deep playoff run. I feel really bad for Klay. I mean, that's devastating. You rehab all year from ACL, then you tear your Achilles. That is just awful. I like the Oubre move. I mean, you got Andrew Wiggins there too. I mean, we didn't really hear a whole lot from him after he got traded over there during the season. But just that trio, they're good players. I'm just not blown away by them. So I'm going to have to go famine.
I think it's going to be feast for them, but famine, it depends on what your expectations are. It's famine for the championship expectations, but I think they're certainly in tier 2. So if that's feast for the Suns, that's going to be feast for Golden State as well. I think that Steph Curry getting healthy and playing a full season is going to be the real deal. We forget how good Steph Curry is, even without Klay Thompson. I know that he is a huge part of what they do, but they add James Wiseman in the draft. They add Oubre. I know Klay Thompson's injury is a big deal, but I think the Warriors can still get things done and be a contender in that sort of tier 2 of the West. Not on the level of the Lakers, the Clippers, but I think they can make some noise, and a team that's well coached with Steve Kerr as well. So I like what Golden State has going on and some of the moves that they made this offseason, Wiseman in particular.